All right, everybody, we are going to start off this episode by playing the pop culture dark triad trivia game. And the rules of the game are this. I'm going to read a trivia question. You have to identify two things: the pop culture character and the dark triad trait. The winner of this game, of this dark triad trivia game, will receive a Dark Triad survival kit, which includes a canister of anti-narcissist spray, a psychopathy swatter, so you can swat those psychopaths, and a Machiavellian zapper, so it kind of goes zip, zip, so you can take out all those Machiavellian folks. So, are you guys ready to play the pop culture Dark Triad trivia game? All right. I see Brad is enthusiastic, so Zoe. So here's your first trivia question. She's a goth girl who's been creating viral dance videos since the 1960s. In her latest adventure at a macabre, Hogwarts-like boarding school, this morose fashionista proves that she is superior to all of her ghoulish classmates and kooky and spooky family members. Who's the character and what's the trait?
Okay.
I think Zoe wants to answer.
I'll go with... Yes, Zoe wants to answer. I'll go with Wednesday Addams. And I'll go with... she has a little bit of fall, but if I had to choose one, I would go with narcissism, I guess.
All the points for that go to Zoe. All right, the second trivia question. He's a double-crossing, shady-dealing son of Asgard whose constant conspiracies and machinations to seize Odin's throne constantly drive his hammer-wielding half-brother to drink at an alehouse with Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, which never turns out well, which might just be part of this character's nefarious plan.
Bing, 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 ding. Loki.
And what's the trait?
Machiavellianism.
Very good, Machiavellianism. All right, final question for this round. So this is for the tiebreaker for that Dark Triad survival kit. You definitely want that Machiavellian zapper. In this study... in a study of this type of character, so we're looking for a type of character in film, a team of psychologists concluded that characters like Hannibal Lecter and Norman Bates did not make the cut because they seemed like archetypical villains. But this Coen Brothers bad boy with an equally bad haircut topped their list for his ability to use his trademark bolt pistol like most accountants use their Excel spreadsheets.
I think that's too American, guys.
Jodah knows.
I'm going to use Jodah's help, I guess. Jodah, I need your help.
Phone a friend?
I'm calling a friend.
Oh, I can't. I'm not going to give it away. I can't.
Was it played by Javier Bardem? No Country for Old Men, right? That was the movie.
Yep.
What was
Okay.
What was his name?
His name was Anton Chigurh.
Okay.
I don't remember his name.
It was right.
Country for Old Men, so we'll give you that. What's the trait?
Psychopathy.
Psychopathy. Very good. So, Brad, ding, 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 you win the Dark Triad survival kit. We will send that in the mail. Don't look for it.
It won't be coming.
It won't be coming.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So,
it's already gotten lost in the mail.
So we are here with our two guests, Zoe Fragou, who is an organizational psychologist and PhD candidate at Pantheon University in the Department of Social and Political Science. She is a leadership developer, team building expert, and award-winning business coach. And we are also here with Brad Topliff. Brad, like Liam Neeson, has a very particular set of skills he has acquired over a very long period of time. He is an organizational Swiss Army knife. He has a blog, and I want to see it. I hope a dance routine goes with that description, Brad. Like, how do you twist? He has a new blog called workalibrium.com where he will share his thoughts on how organizations and employees can learn to love or at least like each other. So welcome both of you to the Sense and Signal podcast. It's a pleasure to have you both as returning guests for this panel discussion on the dark triad and empathy.
Welcome. Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you.
You guys are looking great too. Dan and I are clearly underdressed, and our backgrounds are under background too. I mean, we need some wallpaper, I think. So
I felt like I needed to balance things out. When you're going to talk about the dark triad, I needed to bring a little love.
100%.
Make myself
feel
okay.
So thanks, Dan, for that introduction. That was awesome. But can we take a second before we actually kind of start getting into the nitty gritty of this podcast or the show? Can we maybe just kind of level set for the audience? People have heard these terms: narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, probably time and time again. Can we just take a brief moment and kind of what are these things? What is Machiavellianism? Let's start with there.
Okay.
Right. Go ahead. Zoe, you're the PhD student candidate.
Sure. Candidate. Okay, so Machiavellianism. Well, the interesting thing here is to declare from the beginning that the Machiavellianism is what we would say a lifestyle choice, a modus vivendi, and that's what separates it from pure old psychopathy. Those two behaviors, in the end, they tend to be exactly the same. Like, we are talking about people that they can do whatever, and they will move aside. They will find a way to, even if they have to step over someone's body in order to get what they want. But the difference is that psychopaths, they have a gene predisposition towards that behavior, while Machiavellians, they choose to be this way. So Machiavellianism comes from Machiavelli. He wrote a book, The Prince. He's very famous. He was an Italian philosopher, but also a general. And his motto was whatever means necessary. So basically, that's what Machiavellianism stands for. Finding no matter what, whatever means necessary in order to achieve what I want. Then we have, like we said, psychopaths. Those two behaviors are very similar, but the difference is that psychopaths are born this way. So it's maybe you've seen in films like those children that torture little animals, or that from very early ages they start developing some killing instincts. That's what we call psychopathy. And then it develops and it gets much worse. As an example, I had this client. She's a ballerina in Broadway, actually. And another ballerina tripped her so that she would break her leg and she would steal her part because her part is better. So this is what we call psychopathy. This is the kind of behavior that the average person wouldn't engage to. They wouldn't even go there. And then we have narcissists. I believe that from the three categories, the narcissists are the ones that are the most misleading in pop culture, the ones that it's the hardest to spot out, because usually we believe that whomever has a lot of confidence or is a little bizarre and too much posh or too arrogant, we call them narcissists, but it's not the truth. Many people are overly confident, but they don't necessarily hurt others. So narcissists, it's not about them being the best. It's also about the rest of us being nothing.
Right. We are their satellites, basically.
Exactly. And they will stop at nothing in order to decrease other people's self-worth. And that's why working with people that are narcissists is very hard for others. They're very manipulative. They're also usually overachievers. They're successful. And they have a way of creating identity crisis in the environment.
I've seen that time and time again. Yep.
And so in the workplace, what do these traits look like? Well, how would you identify a narcissist in the workplace, or somebody who's very Machiavellian, or a psychopath?
Now, for starts, they don't try to hide it, Dan. They're very forthcoming about it, and they won't even, they would never not admit it if you ask them, especially narcissists. If you ask a narcissist, are you a narcissist? They will very openly say, yeah, why wouldn't I be? I'm the best. Why is it so bad?
Donald Trump? Is that there? Are you Donald Trump? What's going on? Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. He could be considered a dark triad leader. So the first thing, it's important to say that those three psychological traits, they are so often accustomed together that they create a factor. And that's what we call the dark triad of leadership. A person that has all three traits. And it's very common to find people that have all three three traits. They go hand by hand, I would say. So how are these people? Well, they're very high functional, overachievers. You will never find them in environments like, I don't know, a school. They would never work in a school. They choose environments where the KPIs are very measurable and objective so that they can prove their worth and they don't lose time by trying to prove their worth. So most probably they would be in sales or business development or technology or pharmaceutical, the kind of companies that have innovation, that have a lot of sales, that have a lot of competition, because that's where they can, basically that's the environment that other people will put up with their behaviors. So it makes more sense for them to be there. And
so would you say that, though, like Machiavellian, when I think of Machiavellianism, it's compared to psychopathy, it's more strategic, right? Like a psychopath lacks impulse control. So one thing I really like this when I read it, narcissists will insult you, psychopaths will hit you, and Machiavellians will invade you. So they're the ones that the Machiavellians, because they're making a choice, they're the ones who are strategically thinking about chess, how many steps down the road, what might happen next. So
that's interesting because just you saying that, and I haven't really fomented this thought, but yeah, Machiavellianism is an intentionality. And I think, so you just said it, and you said maybe not even necessarily a genetic propensity, although we could say there's probably a genetic propensity for people who are planners, right? Some people plan more, maybe it's just culture. Where psychopathy, I think they also have a tendency to be, or narcissists can be successful, but not because they're planners, but because they intrude in a space in a way that the world around them is not able to comprehend or cope with. So they kind of get passed in through a system that allows them to succeed. Because, I think, so you just said narcissists they tend to become successful as well, but perhaps not because they're so strategic necessarily, but they put everybody around them on their heels to such a degree that they just kind of get these passes. Or why does a narcissist become so successful?
Yeah. For starts, there is a very strong positive correlation in those three traits. So that means that if you have the one, it's very, very possible that you will have also the others. And also, the more you have of the one trait, the more possible it is that you will have a lot of the others as well. So it's not very easy most of the times to make this distinction. With narcissists, it's easier. Like, it's more often to find someone who is a narcissist, but they're not psychopaths or Machiavellians. But with Machiavellians and psychopaths, it's very difficult to make the distinction. Most of the times, if a person is a psychopath, they will also be Machiavellians and the other way around. Because to be a Machiavellian, like a real Machiavellian, and really whatever means necessary, it takes a certain amount of psychopathy in order to engage to these behaviors. Like, even to make this choice, you do have the cognitive bias, okay, you can understand it and you can choose it, but it's still not the kind of behavior that the average person would engage.
Can you be a compassionate Machiavellian?
By default, it's no. And I'll tell you something interesting about that, compassion. Another name for compassion is what I would say emotional intelligence, right? So the fun fact is that the dark triad as a factor, it correlates negatively with emotional intelligence. So the more of dark triad the person is, the less emotional intelligence they have. And that makes sense, okay. But narcissism on its own, without the other two traits, it correlates positively with emotional intelligence. And that's something that people would never guess. But if you think about it, it does make sense, because if they don't have emotional intelligence, how could they be so good at manipulating others?
That's dark empathy, right? I think there's a term out there for that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we should define, since you introduced that, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit, but can we define what dark empathy is in relation to this conversation?
Basically, it's another name for the narcissists that also score high in emotional intelligence. It's this kind of narcissists that they score high, which means they can understand and interpret other people's behaviors and understand their motives, and then they use them against them so that they achieve whatever they want to achieve.
Yeah, and I think what's based on my understanding, it's also called cognitive empathy, that they are able to intellectually understand what's happening to another person, but they don't really feel it. They don't really have an emotional response to what the other person's feeling.
They understand it, but they're like,
they understand it at the cognitive level.
You can compartmentalize. right?
Yeah.
Like you can compartmentalize better than other people
Yeah,
and
also,
go, hey,
don't imagine that these people are in general very emotional, and only when it comes to other people's emotions they are not. It's more generic than that. It's these kind of behaviors, they tend to affect you as a human being. It's not just in the workplace. That's how they behave with their friends. That's how they behave in their social circles, in their families. It's pretty much the same behavior.
Brad, let me ask you a question. What is the difference between influence and manipulation?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I guess I would say this, the intentionality and the subtlety about it, right? Like you can influence and you can co-create good and bad things, right? You can work together. You can try to make something seem like somebody else's idea, right? Where like it just it feels like the other one is just straight up like strategy, going behind someone's back, not doing it with the other person. Like I was trying to think of the ballerina example, right? Like there was a difference between tripping the person and breaking their leg, right? Or making them feel like they felt that, like they tripped, or making sure you're in the right place in order to trip them, right? Like, ooh, I know they're going to walk over there, right? Like the ballerina example is just so good. It's very cinematic when I think of it, like Black Swan. But you can imagine somebody going, oh, they're going to walk off stage right there. I'm going to make sure I'm in the right position to make sure that I get the upper hand on them.
Yeah, when I think of the ballerina example, I think of the Olympics years ago with Tanya Harding and who was the other girl?
Nancy Kerrigan.
So that's interesting. And I live in Portland, so I am from the Tanya Harding's homeland. Her skating rink was just a few miles from here, and Brad is too. Is she a psychopath? Would she be considered? I mean, she was plotting something. No,
I don't think she knew. Like at least, especially with that because I did saw the Margot Robbie movie actually, and I'm a big Margot
Me
Robbie
too.
fan. So according to the movie, she didn't have any idea that this would happen. She was a friend of Nancy's. It was her husband that plotted the entire thing, and she had no idea. And she was very sad, and she actually broke up afterwards with him.
Oh, that's right.
That's what she wants you to think.
That's exactly what a psychopath would tell you. You know that, right, Zoe?
That's what a Machiavellian would tell you. She's like, hey, honey, wouldn't it be great if somebody took out her knee? I mean, and then off he goes. You're like, I can't believe he did that.
It could be more of a Macbeth type situation, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of them colluding together to,
played out that way. Then that's the difference between influence and manipulation as well, because influence is basically playing on the other person's strengths and trusting them that they will do the best thing and they will be inspired by what you tell them and they will follow your vision, while manipulation is playing on the other person's insecurities.
Yeah.
And creating a situation where they will feel like doing this thing is their only option. Otherwise, they will have consequences that they can't absorb or they can't behave.
Yeah. So I'd like to go back to the organization. I think we kind of jumped out of that for a second, and we've got we're talking about this concept of dark triad, and there's also a thing called the dark tetrad, which I believe also adds cruelty? Is that what it's sadism? Yeah, adds sadism.
Sadism.
I think we're suggesting this dark triad can find itself in an organization or in a role of leadership, and these three coordinates or these four coordinates can be effective for this person to be able to navigate a organizational structure or contemporary. What does that say about organizations, and what does that say about the dark triad? I mean, why is it this person is able to leverage these tools successfully to get them to a position that they want to get to? And sorry for multiple questions, you don't have to answer them all. Is it tenable? Can they succeed in perpetuity, or do they eventually get caught?
Why get caught? Everyone knows they are like that. And most of the times they actually praise them for being like that. They are overachievers. That is a fact. They correlate extremely much with effectiveness and productivity, and their performance is usually skyrocket. And their employees as well, when they're team managers, their employees are also very effective and very productive. But they burn out very fast. So in environments, for example, that you don't care so much about long term, the long term and the perpetuity of the result, but you do care about the result per se. Like, for example, running a campaign for a president, where the result is important. You don't care about this task force to continue after the elections. These kind of people are magic. They will get the job done no matter what. They will do it. And that's why they're so successful. And that's why companies, no matter how much they might dislike them or how much they might think that they're pathogenic and they create problems from the environment, they're afraid of losing them. What I've seen from my personal experience as an organizational psychologist is that, for starters, they always know. Every time they bring me in an organization and there is a dark triad person there, they know. That's how they start the discussion. They say, we have this person, and they create this and this and this. Of course, they might not know to tell me it's a dark triad person, but the behaviors they describe shows that it's a dark triad. But the next thing they say is that, and this person holds 50% of our annual income. Or they have this agenda of the vendors, and if we lose this person, we're also losing all the vendors.
So they've been successful in acquiring a lot of power.
So she might be a psychopath, but she's our psychopath.
And she's a successful psychopath. Right? I mean, she's bringing value to the company or the organization, so it's harder to separate yourself from that person, even though they might be doing damage in other ways, because they're bringing so much value to the company. So I guess it's kind of a game theory kind of thing for the organization. Like, at what point how much patience do we have for these behaviors? As long as they're successful, I guess you're fine with it, right? I'm thinking Don Draper and Mad Men. The company's fine when Don Draper is bringing in all the ad revenue and is successful, but once his alcoholism gets in the way and he starts failing, they're like, you're out the pasture, because you're not bringing in the income that we need anymore.
Also the situation, right? Like those same people that might be super straightforward at work and going drive because they have a sense of where they want to be. They have a sense of how they want to be seen as the successful CEO or whatever leader. They go home and they pet their dog, they hug their wife, they hang out with their children. They might be super empathetic in that sense, right? They're not necessarily emotionally immature at home. They might actually be well aware of how they're doing things. But that's another thing to be successful, right? Like you can drive your kids and make sure that they are doing the thing that all the family will think, oh, wow, they raised some amazing children. Like it's a reflection on them as well. But they still, right? They're like, they care about other things, or at least they put on the presentation of caring on the other things. Go to church, go to, do whatever, volunteering in the community, which might look a lot like empathy and caring, or it could be that they're playing to a particular picture of what the ideal person is.
With these people, power is very important. So a very famous example is how much Hitler loved his dogs. But the dogs weren't human beings, so they couldn't ask anything back, and they couldn't really. When they don't have to force equal relationships, they're better.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm hearing good things. Well, I'm hearing that this person, this dark triad person.
I'm worried about you, Jodah, if you're hearing good things.
No, I am, because we're saying that the dark triad person moves the needle. Don Draper moves the needle that's meaningful to SEC numbers, to business numbers, to certain things. But I am going to ask, what are the negative effects of a dark triad person succeeding inside of an organization? There's got to be some ramifications to this person's doing their thing.
Retention, for starts, it's very difficult for them to keep employees, either because the employees leave or because they fire them, because they don't have any patience to grow and mentor and coach and train, or also burnout, of course. Like I said, they score really high in employee burnout. So the organization has to, in perpetuity, find new people, and again, because they're very expendable, and train again, and hire and recruit. And this is a vicious cycle that goes again and again. Then, of course, team morale is really low, and engagement, organizational engagement. There's a lot of absenteeism. Like the people that are working for dark triads, they tend to miss work more often without excuse and find last minute excuses so that they don't show up. The climate, there's no, of course, collegiality. And the biggest problem is that if for one reason, at one point, the stakeholders or the shareholders or the management team, they stop doing whatever the dark triad leader wants, they're very unpredictable. They have no sense of loyalty. They have no sense of commitment. Therefore, if at one point you tell them no to something that they want, you don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to treat the organization, or what kind of problems they're going to cause.
They might burn everything down.
Right. They're setting a culture, and it depends a lot on the size of the organization and how much that particular leader would actually work directly with people. So, like a CEO, for example, that has a lot of these traits might be surrounded by the leadership team who are all seeing their success based on this person continuing to grow this startup they had into a larger enterprise. And those leaders, even though they're the VPs, they're the SVPs, they might have different traits. So the people below them might like to work for them, but that they're absorbing all this fear. I can remember a particular executive saying that how much he feared CEO firing him from the very beginning. Like that didn't go away as the company grew. So, and executives would just disappear, meaning they would, one day where'd that person go? And they were like, oh, I heard they said something in a meeting that, the CEO didn't like, and boom, they're gone. No thanks for your service. No thanks for getting us to where we were. Just, you're out, you're in. And everybody knows then that they are also vulnerable to that kind of thing. So they're on a certain amount of eggshells, but also having to have their teams succeed so that they can stay within the circle and keep making, bonuses or whatever the thing is. Because if you're on that person's team, if you're helping that, I want to say that dark triad person, but if you're making them look better, then you're in a great place because they want more of you, right? They may go out of their way to do empathy theater or whatever the thing is to make you feel like you belong on their team. When the reality is, they're just people, they're expendable, they're interchangeable to the person at the top.
So there was a story I heard today about Elon Musk. Apparently, there was some Twitter war between him and Biden, or at least they both had a post on Twitter. And according to the news media, and I read all news, was a great deal of skepticism today, especially around Elon. But the story goes that Elon went to one of his engineers complaining that Biden's post was getting more views than his. And the engineer said, well, people just aren't into you anymore, Elon. And Elon apparently fired the engineer, right? And then ordered his other engineers to go in and tweak the algorithm so it would get more views than Biden's posts. So I guess based on that, is Elon Musk, does he represent the dark triad or aspects of the dark triad? Nobody wants to say anything.
I, for one, welcome our robot overlord.
Yeah, robots have no emotions, so it'd be impossible. Well, maybe that make him a psychopath. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that would make, because he has. If that did indeed happen, it would be evidence of some sort of psychopathy.
I think that all of these tech giants present a lot of dark triad elements, to the point that we can judge, since it's not like we are there with them in their work reality. But from what we see, it's not like Steve Jobs didn't portray behaviors like these, or Bill Gates. All of them have, or even Zuckerberg, they've all at one point at least, we've heard these stories from the outside that really portray this kind of profile.
Right, like Steve Jobs is a good example, right? He was invulnerable and therefore ate fruit to battle cancer, right?
He inspired people. He stole money from his best friend. He was refusing to acknowledge his own daughter until the end of his life, basically.
For sure. Far from it.
you get this high without any elements of dark triad? That's the real question. Not that if you're so high, do they have it, but can you really get this high if you don't have it at all?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up. Well,
Yeah,
I was thinking
question.
about the real quick on Steve Jobs. I've worked in Silicon Valley for a very long time, and I've worked in the design field for much of that. And I've noticed that there would be people who start to have a behavior that would be dark triadish, that would be toxic, I would say, for the most part. And I would always assume that they probably read Steve Jobs' book, because I think that book, like how Steve, because the lessons of Steve Jobs, the book that he wrote, the things they thought Steve Jobs represented, they took on and they liked the aspects, the darker aspects, because they thought that was important. So they would go into rooms and are willing to make the people in the room feel like crap. And I go, oh, you read that Steve Jobs book, jokingly. They might have, they might not have. But I think there were people out there who were kind of savvy enough to know that there was this sort of Steve Jobs effect on people in the general Silicon Valley, where it was like, oh, I need to behave this way because this is what a successful person looks like, even though it might not even necessarily been their natural way of doing things.
So a copy of a copy of a copy of the Dark Triad, right? Like Steve Jobs is a dick, so therefore it must be being a dick that gets you there. So I'll just be a dick.
Yeah, but now I'm thinking of the FTX guy, or the Theranos lady, or that other guy who raised the I don't know, I think it was the H medicine. He rated 800% up the moment he had
what bro, something bro. What? Yeah. Pharma
bro. Yeah.
So it's not like it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 examples. There are enough examples in order to create a story.
Dan is one.
All of those examples had a crash, and even Steve Jobs for a while had a crash. He got fired by Apple at one point. So they do tend to crash.
Wait, Dan, that's a great example. That's a great example. Okay, you get that, but that's a great example because he probably got kicked out because he was a dick, right? He wasn't moving the needle, and he was a dick. But they probably were like, you know what? Let's bring him back, knowing he's not a good guy, but they wanted needles to be moved. They're willing to sacrifice things. Yeah. So he's almost a really good example. They weren't hiring.
Well, it's just that. Gets back to the Don Draper thing, right? It's the same thing within that Mad Men story and that character arc. I mean, he has the same character arc as Jobs, because he comes back and is able to move the needle again, and so again brings value back to the company, even though he has some of these dark attributes. But I want to get back to Zoe's question about, can you be successful in business or in an organization without having these attributes? Is that possible?
Well, you can be successful for sure. The question is, at this kind of 1 in the billion level, if you can be successful. Because we're not talking about, there are many successful people, of course, and they're very healthy, and there are many visionary leaders in many corporations. But I'm not sure about this kind of level of success, of like being the Elon Musk or the Steve Jobs, this kind of pioneer that shows up one every 20 years and disrupts things. This, I don't know if I'm sure, because well, it takes other kind of elements. It takes also an amount of neurotism and a bit of an obsession, and probably it removes you from ordinary activities. I can't see Elon Musk enjoying, I don't know, cooking dinner for his children, or these small things that us really enjoy, like me going to the airport to pick up a friend. I just can't see those people, in a sense, existing in a sphere with other people, having social lives in the sense of actually being a social human being. Therefore, that's what I'm not so sure. If you can get this high without a certain level of Machiavellianism / narcissism, because you also need to believe it, right? You also need to believe that you deserve to be there and you're entitled to this level of success. If you don't believe it, how are you going to reach it? And then,
I think that's.
Yeah, and if you believe it, then if you're so sure about it, what's stopping you from, proving it to everyone else?
I think that Amazon Bezos is a pretty good example of that, right? Like he could have been successful as a smaller, just take over bookstores, but he was looking for something particular, right? Like I want I want to take over the world. He was like, and when you read their whatever it is, however many, I don't remember the number is 10 or 15 values that they talk about. And they, like the words in there are it's brilliant. If you interview at Amazon, you're like, wow, this is very, very cultish. I can see why it would be so, so successful, right? Because everybody's doing the same thing. But the words they use in those values are like customer obsession, relentless frugality, or whatever the thing is. It's just so big and in your face and harsh that it doesn't feel like a good place. You can be successful in there, and sure, there's going to there's how many people work for Amazon. There's a lot of good people in there too that are doing the thing that they said. But to get as big as you want to be, that vision that whatever Bezos had when he started of just doing everything and taking over all this stuff, you can't get there without that level of obsessive, dark triad-y kind of stuff, right? Like you can be a successful CEO. You see them in startups probably more than you see them, once they get to a certain size, like with Jobs, they're like, he's not operational enough. You got to be both operational and brutal and all of these things in order to keep rising all the way up to the top of that. Fortunately, there's not that many of those positions available. So,
right.
People are sort of like, there's a ceiling on how many just massive companies.
There's another good character to kind of, for an example, of that, going back to the TV shows, is, what was his name? Frank Underwood from House of Cards. So, because I think we were sold that he actually was a true blue Democrat. Like he was a Democrat. Like I think we were sold that he actually had beliefs that he was doing the right thing, but he'd kill people. I mean, ultimately Machiavelli, right? I mean, when he pushed that girl off the train tracks because she was causing problems, so he couldn't get what he thought was a good thing for the people.
I mean, okay, and Stalin started as a socialist.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Hitler loved his dog. Stalin was a socialist.
Yeah. No, it's. I'm reading a list here, and it's just for psychopathy. It's not for the dark triad, but the list has the top 10 professions.
But I would argue Frank Underwood, to Zoe's point earlier, that he has all those traits. Frank Underwood talks to the camera like a narcissist. And he, because he breaks the third wall in that series. So, and he's always talking about himself to the camera and exhibiting that narcissistic trait. He's Machiavellian, as we've already established. And in order to push a reporter onto the train tracks,
100%. No, he's definitely dark triad.
So was Kevin Spacey really acting?
Or
because I think he might have had those traits too.
It must have been more for the documentary, guys.
He's at least a narcissist.
Yeah. But another thing that I think it's important to point out here is that you also need to not have a life in order to be like that. It's kind of a full-time job. And people, they read Steve Jobs' diary or they see a documentary about, I don't know, Bill Gates, and they think that, okay, if I focus and if I'm like that and if I wear a turtleneck, it's going to happen. Well, it's not going to happen, obviously. And it's not just the point of you might have the talent and you might be smart enough and you might be even psychopath enough, but still, you really need to cut yourself completely off everything else that's going on. It's a full-time job being a dark triad leader. It requires so much energy. And Jorge Bucay, whom I love in general, he's a psychologist and he writes books. And he said at one point that neurotic people spend half their life creating traps and the other half life falling inside the same traps.
No, that makes sense.
So basically, it's a bit again of a vicious cycle of being like that. And of course, they don't have any work-life balance. They don't care about having a work-life balance. But I think it's our society's fault of romanticizing this idea. We're idealizing burnout, and we're idealizing being a dark triad. All these movies about all these people like Frank Underwood or Devil Wears Prada, right? And Miranda Kingsley and all of these. We've been talking about pop culture examples for half an hour now, and we still think of more. So why are we romanticizing it? They have awful lives, awful. Like they're alone from the first day till the last. They don't trust anyone, and they have all this money. They don't know what to do with this money. It's not like they gain. They don't seem to know how to spend it. Let's start there.
Yeah, I might have a couple $1 billion and have trouble getting rid of it all. They want more, right?
But there is for us, it seems easy, like what we would do with them. But the thing is that if you don't really gain, like me, okay, I know exactly what I would do with $1 million. I would be on the theater every day. I would stop working completely. And I like my job. I love it. But, I love Pilates more, obviously.
Yeah.
I would in the beach outside my house, doing Pilates by the sunset and drinking pina coladas. And this would be the life. But if you don't really gain any kind of inspiration and satisfaction from these simple things, then what's there for you?
I think they're devoid. There's something hollow inside of them. They don't need that anymore, probably. I'm using very loosey-goosey terminology here, but I would think there's a pit in them somewhere. But sticking with this notion where you are asking, why do we care about these people? What's so interesting about them? Let's take that to the next level and ask, why is it we're in a world that supposedly, or maybe it's always been that way. Maybe you get to a particular point in power where it has to go this way. But why can't a person with good ideas, good intentions, not narcissistic, not psychopathic, but with a good heart and good work ethic become, the seat of such power structures? What is it about our society that doesn't allow that to happen?
Well, I'll tell you something that I realized very recently. I started watching this show, Killing Eve. I don't know if you know it. There's this girl who is a very high profile, like serial killer, but not like she's like a hit girl. Though they hire her to kill targets. And I realized that being a murderer is the closest we have to our society to being to having superpowers, if you think about it. It's the only thing that separates the average person from an extra person, that they really have superpowers, because if they are to kill and they don't care about killing someone,
that's interesting.
Nothing stops them. They can do whatever they want. And I think that's fascinating for us, because most of us don't have any superpowers. We just have the same means in our agenda. We all fight with the same weapons. What are these weapons? Some of us are funny, some others are pretty, some others are intelligent, some are educated. Pretty much the same 10 things that, some more, some less, but that's it. And then there are these few people that they completely turn the chess around and they turn the roulette around, and they're playing a different game that's completely unapproachable to us.
And you know what they say, you can never kill, you can't just kill one, like I'm sure that and I'm only being, half kidding on that. You think that somebody gets that idea that they want that power, right? And they want to go kill somebody in real life, and Ted Bundy or whatever. He didn't necessarily go, I'm going to kill all of these people. He killed one and went, now I feel super powerful. Now I feel that superpower. I want to keep doing it.
Exactly. And let's say that me and you, Brad, we are competing for the same position at job. And let's say that I'm smarter and prettier and better at everything, but then you don't hesitate to, let's say.
No argument.
Which is true. Sorry, Brad.
Yeah. She nailed all of them.
If you kill me, who cares? At the end, if you kill me, it's over. You'll get the job. If you don't get caught, it won't matter, because you have something that I never have. And this one thing that you have, and kill me, it can be also metaphorical, because if you also, let's say, put heroin in my bag and you get me accused of selling drugs and I end up in prison, these all kind of behaviors, they're so larger than life, but then there are people that engage in these behaviors. And that's fascinating. They make movies about that because we think that it's so extra that it doesn't happen, but it does happen. There are people there.
Right. And it would be the same if we're going back to the CEO that I was talking about, right? You've got people in the sort of seat of power, and while they're not actively in front of each other jockeying for position, they're always jockeying for position and going like, oh, if I'm close enough to him, I can say, that person over there, I don't know. Sometimes they do some stuff that's weird, and start planting seeds in their head, and effectively you're killing their career at that place, because now that leader's like, yeah, I started to not like that person, right? There's a gossiping side of things that grows, right? You see,
Right.
if you're successful at gossiping and raising yourself up by dragging somebody else down, then you get that, you got that sort of feeling of power, whether it was accidental when you did it, right? It's like, but on the other hand, people who hear gossip from you also just would naturally assume that you would gossip about them too. So it's a real, then you have to get to Machiavellianism in order to make it so that they don't think that, like, you want the person that you're gossiping to trust you.
And Brad, you're still staying in
the
sort of the zone that Zoe's in, because basically now you're talking about a character assassin. This person again is killing you, but they're killing your character. Something again that, like, the average person, it just doesn't even think about or wants to do, doesn't have the energy to do. I'd rather just, like, me personally, if there's someone I dislike or I think they're doing something better than me, I look back at me and go, okay, I'm going to get better. I'm not like, okay, I'm going to stay where I'm at and make sure this person doesn't enter my mind in that way, But, and on that note, what do you guys think about this concept? Because you're right. I think we all agree that this does exist. But don't you think the narrative, although in the movies, it says it's in the movies, but don't you think that as the average person, you're constantly told, no, they're not out to get you. No, that person isn't. That's in the movies. That really the world is more bland than that we're told that narrative, that these extreme things, someone cuts your brakes so that you don't get to the office in time to make that meeting, get that pitch, that, like, that's not going to happen. Who's going to do that? And I think we're suggesting it can, right? But isn't there a narrative out there that's constantly telling us it doesn't happen?
I'll tell you what is this that's telling us it doesn't happen. Our own inner conflict, because we don't know how to manage it.
Totally.
We don't address it. We don't want. It's like every time they say this person is a narcissist, and I think that they're very insecure. That's why. That's such an easy explanation, and it makes us feel so good with ourselves. Like we have some kind of moral, superiority. Yeah, we're so much better because we don't engage. But it's not that. We're afraid to engage, and we don't know how to engage. And it's a kind of sphere that if we try to engage, we're going to lose because they have more experience, obviously. But it would be much better if we actually look at this truth in the eye and say, okay, they're not insecure. They very genuinely believe they're better. They very genuinely believe I'm worse. And okay, let them believe whatever they believe, We don't always have to explain everything in a way that makes us look better than someone else. Sometimes we can just say, okay, it's different, and red flag, bye-bye. I shouldn't stay here and try to prove any point. That's the biggest mistake people do. They meet a dark triad leader and they engage, and they think that they can gain their approval or they can gain their respect. And they don't understand that for these kind of people, we are all expendable. As long as they need you, you're okay.
Just chess pieces on the board.
So let's talk for a second about nature versus nurture on that, though, because some of these things we talk about, with such intent, but they're learned behaviors that we got from our parents, right? Like I think Zoe said, psychopathy has a genetic trait to it, but Machiavellianism is a choice. But, is it, right? Like you talk about emotional intelligence, and the flip side of that is emotional, what's the word? I just lost it. It's not intelligence. It's emotional
regulation.
No, it's maturity, emotional maturity, right? Like you get emotional maturity because you learn behaviors from your parents, right? Or your circle, but as we get, as you look back and you head back to my parents and then their parents, and you're on an orchard at that point, right? They're farming folk, with maybe more extreme religion, right? And a bunch of those traits, that emotional immaturity gets passed down until you go, oh, I'm going to break that cycle because I do care about people and I want to talk about empathy and I want to understand, but it's not necessarily, my mom's no longer with us, so I can talk about her. That's easy, right? It's not her fault that she was necessarily that way. It wasn't a choice to be that way. It comes from a whole bunch of environmental factors, from genetics and how they were brought up and where they were brought up. And, if you want to go like how much, your great grandpa drank, right, and showed these examples of things and taught you how to be these things, right? When you get to that point and those traits of yours start to give you success, right? Like you start to go, oh, well, I want to be successful. I'm going to aim at being the Bezos or the whoever, you want to model after. And the thing that I'm doing is working, right? Like being this way has shown to me that I can get ahead of the guy in my MBA program. I can, do slightly better and talk to the professor. Like that stuff is showing me success, and I'm going to learn that. And then I'm teaching it also to the people, below me or whatever they're like, oh, I can see how successful I'm ambitious. I want to have money. So I'm going to start emulating those behaviors, whether it was at home or at work.
Do you, is that a thing? Does that happen?
Yeah.
Do we think that these traits get seen and people adopt them even though they might be contrary to their nature?
I'll start with another question. How many psychologists do we need to change a lamp, guys?
How many?
One, but the lamp needs to want to change. Well, we can talk about nurture with nature, but dark triad leaders don't want to change. There is no universe in which they would ever want to change. They would never. Like, it's interesting, but I was talking with this girl. She's writing a book, and it's about a shrink who has a client, and the client is a narcissist. And she asks me, "What's your opinion, Zoe?" And I'm like, "How did this narcissist end up at the shrink's office? They would never go for a shrink session. They would never visit a psychologist, a narcissist." So these people, they nurture, we can say that they train themselves or they find it in the environment. In any case, this starts to happen very soon in life, and they keep getting rewards from that. So no matter what we say, they would never wake up one morning and say, "You know what? I care about people. I should show empathy." And that's a very common mistake that people do. They think that they're going to change. They think that they're capable of change, and they live completely outside the factor of motivation. Why would they want to change? Why would they have any motive to change when they can get absolutely everything in this life? To take this example, at the edge, I don't know if you've heard, but most of the times, a child molester or like a pedophile, they have been molested themselves as children.
Sure.
So the psychoanalytic mechanism that works there is that by reproducing the trauma, they're not alone anymore. By creating more victims, there are other victims that they've gone through the same, so their own internal conflict gets better. They feel better. So to take this example and put it in the dark triad context, basically by reproducing these traits, they create more empty people. So this could be, I guess, psychoanalytic interpretation of why these people are like that. You said before they're hollow and there's a pit. They're not trying to fill their own hollow. They know that they can't fill their own hollow. What they're trying to do is to create more hollows around them. They don't think that there's something wrong with them and they need to change. They think that there's something wrong with all of
Misery
us
loves company,
and we
right?
need to change. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a good point, Zoe. And I think it brings a question I've been wanting to ask, because it sounds like, so we have these dark triad people in organizations. They often rise to top leadership positions because of the traits they have, and they don't want to change because they're benefiting from those traits. So for the rest of us, how do we protect ourselves from people who exhibit dark triad traits in an organization? What's our survival guide?
First choice, run like the wind, Forrest. Run like the wind in the sun. These are red flags. You shouldn't ignore them. You shouldn't think that there's something there. No, they're not going to change. That's how it is. You get it pretty right. Trust your instincts. If you have any basic survival instincts, just go. Second option, let's say you can't go. And why you can't go? Because it's an amazing opportunity. It's a job. You need the experience. Don't engage personally. You need to be able to separate business self from personal self and leave everything else that happens at work. So they might call you names, or by the way, they're amazing chameleons. If with Dan, what works is to be insulting, they will be insulting. And if with Brad, what works is to be flattering, they can be flattering. So don't take this personally. It has nothing to do with you. It is 100% with them. So
Yeah.
even if you have their approval, it's because it suits them to approve you. And if you don't have their approval, it's because it doesn't suit them. So go there, do the job as best as you can, and keep emotion out of it. If you try to engage with a person like that in any, even a little bit emotionally, you're lost, it's over.
They call it a healing fantasy, right? Like, oh, if I did these things, then that person would change or see me, or like the things that they say to me, they're not understanding me. If I only could just say these couple of things and explain it, but but it's a fantasy, and as soon as you give that up, then yeah, you can live in that world without depending on them for some sort of empathetic, soul feeding something.
I will have a gender role as well here, because for women it is worse. And the reason it is worse is because women are raised with these fantasies of, if you're good enough, and if you're kind enough, and if you're amazing enough, then you can change the other person. You can take the beast and make him a prince. You can take the frog and make him a husband. You can figure it out no matter what the other person. So it's even harder for women to recognize these red flags and say, okay, it's none of my business. This person needs therapy. Bye-bye. No, they will stay there. They will stick there, and they will put effort that sometimes they don't even have this energy. And they will give this energy, and then they will end up burnout.
Isn't it a little more nefarious? It's even nefarious in the sense that the narcissist aspect, and maybe it's a Machiavelli, but the narcissist aspect of the dark triad will lean in on those people who sort of they can see are looking for their approval. They'll leverage that, and they'll avoid and ignore the ones that you're saying who don't engage, because they're not getting the feedback. But the ones that they know are susceptible and they can leverage, they'll lean in and hook onto those people.
That goes for everything in life. Like, it takes two to tango. If somebody's fishing, you need to be a fish and catch the bait. Otherwise, if you're not getting fished, then the other person is going to have to go fish anywhere else.
So I'm going to read off a couple of some traits here, just because I think we're on the subject. So we're talking about defending, and I think I'd like to actually, Dan, just continue with this, because I'd be curious, like the notion of because I think maybe companies should have a policy of dealing with narcissism and Machiavellianism. Like, that's a thing, right? But how does it get manifested visually? And so I got this list of some things here, and tell me what you guys thought, or a list of traits of the dark triad that you'll see in a corporation or organization. So things like public humiliation of others, that'd be one. Malicious spreading of lies, rumorless, devoid of guilt, frequently lie to push one's own point, produce exaggerated bodily expressions as a means of gaining attention. Some narcissistic, maybe. Rapidly shift between emotions. Intentionally isolate persons from organizations' resources. Quick to blame others for mistakes or for incomplete work. Encourage coworkers to torment, alienate, harass, and humiliate.
So as you read this list, Jodah, I want to go back to a comment that Zoe made at the beginning of the episode, where I think Zoe said that you don't tend to see dark triad people in education. And as somebody who works in higher education, they are there. All those traits I can testify are there in certain people.
In academics, it's different. It's different. When I'm in education, I was talking like professors in a school, in a high school, or in kindergarten. Academics, of course, it's full of these people. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah.
The kindergarten dark triad.
Man.
They just put Xanax in your coffee so that you miss the presentation.
So why would that be? Why is that? That surprises me. I mean, why? I mean, I understand. I can see academia being cutthroat in the sense of competition, finite resources. You're trying to shine. So I do see that. But does that necessarily necessitate dark triad personalities to be
Well, you just said it. You said competition.
But you have competition
in kindergarten teachers.
Right, but I don't think you have a bunch of dark triad people playing baseball, or I mean, there's competition without that, right? There's like I want to be the best athlete. I mean, maybe you're juicing. I don't know, but you're not. Other than Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding, right? You're trying to
right.
I think
I'd say in
ballerina,
professional
right?
sports, there's probably a lot of dark triad.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that.
But that's and you're also talking about a team, right? Like you're talking about those people are on a team by necessity. They know the pitcher knows he needs the first baseman. Like all of those things. They may want to be the star of the team or make the most money or something like that. But some of the other things you're talking about, there can only be one prima ballerina. So that's why they, might take a step to trip that person.
Yeah. So back to my initial question though, before I sort of went that way, why would education be such a hotbed of that? Why would higher education? It's not grade school or kindergarten? I thought it.
Yeah. I think, in my opinion, academics are probably a predictable place for dark triads because, one, limited resources. Therefore, you need to be inventive in order to get access to more resources. And two, more subjective criteria. Like there are these things that are called peer review. So sometimes it's not necessarily that you've done the best job, but you might have the best network, or especially in soft skills sciences like theoretical sciences, where it's more about each person's idea. Then it has more to do with network and how you got published there than actual, I invented this thing that I'm going to get the Nobel for. Therefore, it's a very easy area for these behaviors to be, manifested if you want to be seen.
Finite resources and high level subjectivity are key ingredients.
Mm-hmm. And I would also argue an emphasis on prestige, right? Getting publications, getting grants. And I also say that people in the faculty in higher education are very autonomous. And so they don't necessarily always have to work as a team necessarily. So I could see where there are a lot of factors that would draw people with dark triad personality traits into that profession. And where they would be successful
would be the same.
The prestige is a very important factor because, like we said in the beginning, you never find dark triads in environments that they don't have status, they don't have money, they don't have prestige. You will always find them in environments that provoke power or status. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there to begin with. It wouldn't be satisfying for their ego.
Interesting. With that said, as Dan rudely interrupted me about 20 minutes ago, I was going to go down a list on psychopaths. And so here's the top 10 list of psychopath jobs. Just take a grain of salt, starting with the worst, the main, yeah.
Podcaster.
I was wondering, are we narcissists for doing a podcast?
That's loser. Sorry, that's psychopath. So we got CEO, which I think that's kind of the trope, right? CEO. What do we hear? We hear various numbers, like 1 in 3, 1 in 10, something like that. Yeah,
the psychopath.
No, well, you would say psychopathic traits.
Right? Psychopathic trait.
What's that?
On the list.
Surgeon.
Doctor,
they have surgeon here as 6 as number 6. Number 2, they got lawyer. Again, this I'm sure there's different rankings in here for different studies. Media, TV, radio host is 3. Salesperson is 4. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Podcaster. Surgeon is 5. Sorry, Zoe. Surgeon is 5, not 6. Journalist. So I guess maybe we're journalists. I don't know. Is 6. Police officer. Ooh, see, that's interesting. Actually, surprises me.
Have seen this one come.
I don't know. I kind of. Okay, yeah, you're right. I guess if you sat there and thought about it, right? Yeah, sure. I guess you just wouldn't hope that. It's like, okay, wait. Next one, 8. Maybe this is a joke. 8 is clergy, psychopath. Okay. 9 is chef, and 10 is so broad, civil servant. So I don't know. Whatever. Take what that means.
So a lot of those are kind of, in a way, they're meritocracies, right? Like all of those they fall into that area where you would hope that would mean the best person, gets the highest position. But in the reality is best is a super subjective thing that you're going to, I got credit for that discovery or saving that life or do whatever. It's more credit. And someone's standing there like, no, actually, I did that thing. But they've already taken that credit. They've already run with it, and they've already succeeded based on it.
Do facts matter to a dark triad person? Facts. Just the facts. Do facts mean anything to them?
Yeah, of course. That's why they choose, like I said, environments with very specific KPIs. If anything, one would argue that only facts matter. They only judge people based on where they've come, but not based on the distance they've covered.
And so what should organizations do if you, because like I said, I know of people who exhibit some of the traits that we've talked about today in organizations I've worked for. And yeah, I get you, like run away as fast as you can. Some people can't do that though. Some people can't necessarily escape the person in the organization who might be expressing these traits. What are some other things that we can be doing in organizations to address these types of toxic behaviors?
I mean, there's transparency I would say is a pretty big one, right? There's some organizations that publish to everybody in the company what somebody's personality test. If you're doing Myers-Briggs or you're doing Discovery Insights and you have those, and they say, hey, here's who I am. Here's how I like to work. And if your organization is showing that as a value, that sort of transparency, then people can, like the outliers, the people who are like, I like to work by knocking everybody down and gossiping isn't going to make that list. So it's like you have to be more, like I would say the dark triad people, while you might say, yes, we all know that they're being outwardly psychopathic, they're not going to put psychopathic down. They're not going to say, oh yeah, I got dark triad in spades for people, because that's, that doesn't sound very good either. You would spin all those things to be more, like one of the things I remember in this, I think it's Insights Discovery is one of those Jungian personality tests. And we did that in another company. It's red. Red is give me the information as little as possible. I want to make a decision right now. Blue is data. Yellow it's sunshine yellow. Like I want to help people. And green is I want the world to be a better place. I was in a program, excuse me, private equity learning program. Everybody there was either red or blue. And I'm over here being yellow. Like when they split everybody up into what do you lead with? And I'm like, hey guys, I'm over here. These were all, the future executive type people, and they were all red, blue, right? Like you could see it a mile away why those people are succeeding. But the transparency of knowing going into a meeting with that person and going like, they just want the information. They don't want me to give them 12 paragraphs that they have to read. So learning how to work with people is a good excuse to have transparency, and transparency it can be helpful in figuring that out. Maybe not way at the top, but if we're talking about sort of mid-level and those leadership roles, then there's more pliability. But Elon Musk and transparency, I don't know if that's going to work.
And I would take it one step further, and I would say that also not gaslighting people, that when they come and you're like, okay, you might have a dark triad leader and you might not be able to get rid of them because, like we said, they hold a big part of the company's income, so they have to stay. But when a person comes and complains to you about their behavior, don't gaslight them. Don't tell them they're crazy, that they imagine these behaviors. Tell them, unfortunately, we know you're right, but we can't let them go. It's much better than making the person they already feel bad about what's happening. So don't make them feel crazy on top of that.
Right.
Gaslight them. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I could feel
There's no
that.
such thing as gaslighting.
What's that?
Did you say there's no such thing as gaslighting?
There's no such thing as gaslighting.
I've never been gaslit ever.
No.
You're crazy.
No.
And that's the first thing. I can tell you something that I always recommend doing. If you have a person like that, be pretty clear about it from when you hire a person. Like tell them, in the team, there's also a person who's very difficult. Don't take it personally. It's just their personality. Don't engage. So that the other person, when they join a team, they know what to expect. And it's much easier for them afterwards to be in that place and not engage in this behavior and not bite the fishing, let's say, as well. But when they have no idea what they're going up against then it's much more difficult, right?
It's brutal.
And when you're working and cross-functionally, that can be it's really difficult as well. Because suddenly you've got, marketing people or UX. Sorry, you got marketing people, UX people, people with certain personality types, and you bring a salesperson, you bring a top salesperson into the room, and people are like, "Whoa, what was that all about?" That salesperson can't succeed by wanting everybody to succeed. They have to drive at a customer and make a $10 million deal, and they're gonna have some of those, maybe all of those traits. So you just have to go, look, everybody's different. Not everyone's just gonna come in and give everybody a big hug. Let's all just understand that humans are different. Their brains work differently. There's no way that you can truly understand what's going on in another person's head and what's intentional. So you can see bad behaviors, but you also have to have some understanding that different behaviors are also okay. They don't necessarily mean that you're a psychopath just because you did X. People want to diagnose and they want to label everything. And then they're like, oop, that guy's a narcissist. I'm done. Don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
He's already a narcissist. Getting back
we
off
throw
of
around
that
the term
is
narcissist way too much in the world today, in our culture today, I think, for sure.
Dan calls me a narcissist all the time. And I'm like, dude, it's not.
I'm usually saying it while I'm looking in the mirror, quaffing myself.
So I want to ask a question on that. So, and I think I know what the answer is going to be from all of you, but I just throw it out there. Should an organization, all things being equal, should an organization, if they know they're hiring, there's the person in front of them exhibits dark triad traits, should they hire them?
In my opinion, they can do whatever they want as long as they own it. And that's the complaint I always have with the organizations I consult. You're an organization. I told you the other time, there's no such thing as toxic culture. There's functional or dysfunctional. But you need to own your decisions. You need to own your choices. Don't act afterwards as if I didn't know what I was doing, or I was so innocent, I was so naive, and then this person we didn't know, or they're here, but they're blackmailing us because they have a lot of power. No, you gave them those powers. You made a decision with personal, organizational cost. And now the time to pay that cost has come. Shut up and pay the cost. Own your decision. Like at this point, it's all about being accountable and it's all about being mature when it comes to organizations. And then if you are accountable and mature, you can even have an okay retention because you can find other psychopaths. all these people that read the biography of Steve Jobs and they were like, okay, from here and then turtlenecks and iPhone. That's who I am. That's my personality now. Go hire those people. But don't hire the Dans and the Brads and the Jodas of the world who just came in this by accident and they thought it's a great environment.
Touche.
Yeah, touche. So I know we're coming to we're probably past the hour mark. One of the questions that Jodah and I like to ask toward the end of an episode is, what are the key takeaways from this conversation? What are, for the audience and for yourselves and for us, what should we be walking away from this episode thinking about?
From me, the one thing I would like to let everyone know is that stop romanticizing and idolizing being a psychopath. It's not romantic. It's not beautiful. Just go and enjoy life. There's nothing better in this life than having a support group, a real support group, real people that really care about you with your faults and your goods, just because you are who you are and not because they have something to gain from you and you have something to gain from them. That's the real magic. And life is hard for all of us, really hard. So the least we can do is not try to make it even harder for others.
Touche again. Yes.
Yep. And for me, I would say that, that sort of transparency and accountability, the ownership that Zoe mentioned, right? It's like you are not a victim of your environment. You are a participant in your environment. So, right. If these things exist, maybe they exist, that's why we want to negatively label. Every time you say dark triad, I think no one's wearing a shirt that says dark triad, right? It's not Harry Potter where they're like, oh, I'm on the Death Eater squad. I'm on this. In most people's brains, even in the dark triad brains, they believe that what they are doing, is that a magic wand? That
Nice.
they believe that what they are doing is right? Maybe they think they're changing the world or supporting their family or their community or making this company successful, right? But they're not, most people, even Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, aren't going home and going like, let's make the world a worse place. They just might have a different vision on what the world should look like.
Nice. So how can folks get in touch with you? If Zoe, if people want to hire you as a leadership consultant, how do they find you?
I am literally everywhere. I'm a true millennial, proud millennial. So I'm on TikTok, I'm on Pinterest, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, very active on LinkedIn. I have a website, fragou.com. So reach out with whatever kind of means it works best for you. And pretty much I'm always there. I will respond.
Nice. Brad, how about you?
I'm hiding under a digital rock. LinkedIn is always a great place. I spend a lot of time in there as well, reading what Zoe's posting because it's always great. Like you said, Dan, I'm working on my blog, Workequilibrium. So that's where I'll be available there. Or just, call Jodah, ask him. Wow. He knows where I am.
True.
Well, it was wonderful having you both on this episode, and we'll definitely have to have you both on again at some point. I know we wanted to talk about empathy, but I think the dark triad was just too engrossing for us. So, and I hope it was for the audience. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you too.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Oh yeah, next time we can do the light triad. We'll
Is there a light triad?
No, just EQ leaders. The opposite is emotional intelligent leaders.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that emotional intelligence and empathy next time.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, everybody.